strategic planning for 2025 and beyond. We're thrilled to introduce our host, Sue Black. Welcome, Sue. Thank you for being here. It's such an honor to have you. Sue is the Chief Process Officer at Get Staffed Up, and she brings over 20 years of experience in cadence planning and lean initiatives, with a proven track record of implementing goal-setting strategies across sectors, including the Colorado Department of Law. At Get Staffed Up, Sue spearheads process improvements and project management efforts, paving the way for sustainable success. Before we begin, please note that we'll address questions after the presentation, so feel free to share anything in the Q&A section as come to mind. And now, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to the one, the only Sue Black. Welcome.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you and welcome everyone. I am Sue Black, and as Terry mentioned, I have the privilege of serving as Chief Process Officer here at Get Staffed Up. I lead the department that provides technical documentation, process analysis, project management, and user experience support to the company. One of the ways in which our process improvement division, that's the tech writing and process analysis arm, elevates Get Staffed Up is by crafting planning resources and facilitating tactical planning sessions for each department here. I work with our co-founders, Brett Tremblay and Enrique Fernandez, to do the same for the C-suite's strategic planning sessions. I've spent most of my career in internal operations development, and this has afforded me the opportunity to facilitate and lead strategic planning in a variety of venues. Effective planning is a personal and professional passion of mine, and I'm thrilled to share this time with you. Next slide, Terry. There are many ways to incorporate strategic planning into your business, and there are near countless frameworks and programs that prescribe planning elements like attendee, roster, agenda, and naming conventions. Many of these frameworks provide helpful organization, and they reduce the administrative burden of planning. Almost all of them kind of repackage the same common sense planning elements, fine-tuned based upon business specifics like size, industry, and work culture. Today's webinar does not promote a specific branded framework. Instead, we're diving into the fundamentals that apply to strategic planning across the board. What we're discussing today fits into any framework that you currently use or plan to use and can serve as a base to develop your own custom playbook. We're defining strategy, detailing the three main planning elements, discussing the attendance and roles of planning session contributors, covering basic agenda elements, calling out the most critical common strategic planning considerations, and incorporating the communication approaches that lead to effective planning adoption. Next slide. So what is strategic planning? It's the process by which we lean into our core vision and use the best information available to us to map out how we become what we aim to be. It's absolutely critical to approach planning a step outside of daily operations, shifting from solutioning acute issues to the big picture. Equally important is to commit to what we want to accomplish during the planning cycle and session, learning from each effort and refining the elements for the next cycle. In one way or another, we are all always planning. It is not optional, and it's not even possible to avoid it. The question is, are we being intentional about the way that we plan so that it ensures the outcomes that we desire? Next slide. The outcomes of strategic planning are fairly straightforward. First, we revisit and reiterate your vision, the ideals upon which you started the venture, and the impact that you hope it has on yourself, your business, your clients, the community, or the industry. Borrowing from Get Staffed Up's core values, this is the time to dream big. Next, set the goals that will help you to achieve your vision. This is where you've got to start getting specific. Does your firm need to grow, right size, or open new offices? Is there a profit or margin that will allow you to step into the next phase of your business? Do you need to improve your collection rate? Do you intend to reach a certain number of clients or a share of the market, expand your geographical reach, or incorporate a new area of practice into your firm? Finally, after your goals are set, it's time to define how you're going to achieve them. Do you need more professional expertise in-house? Do you need to expand your marketing efforts? Do you need to invest in new technology or training that will help keep your firm ahead of the curve? Next slide. Mission, vision, and values are the elements that comprise the core of any business. I'm going to lump all these together and call it vision. If your firm's core is already in place, then you've already jumped the first hurdle of strategic planning. If you've not yet defined these elements for your firm, gather key stakeholders in a pre-planning session to craft them. It's okay to tweak these elements as your firm evolves, and if it's time for a refresh, complete this refinement before, not during, your planning session. Also, before going into the planning session, make sure that your mission, vision, and values are published in a place that is easily referenced by all of your firm's employees. This evergreen resource ensures alignment at every level, serves as guidance after the planning, and encouragement during the times that execution can feel tedious and disconnected from what you planned at the beginning. Next slide. While goal setting seems simple enough, there are a myriad of things that can derail it before you even have a chance to work toward your vision. Keeping with the theme of broad applicability, we're diving into the most important parts of goal setting in the ways that you can tailor to your firm. We're covering the type of metrics to use in support of strategic aims, the timelines for achieving goals, and the data that allows you to set the right numbers. The balancing act of setting stretch goals while creating accomplishments and crediting those accomplishments, and as with other elements of planning, accountabilities. Next slide. Goals are clearly defined targets, the attainment of which will help you to realize your vision. A goal must be represented by an actual number, and the number must be something that you're able to track over time, reporting on progress. You must also be able to define your current state or current number so that you know that you've actually succeeded. Goals can measure nearly anything. To ensure that goals lead to effective execution plans, they should reflect key areas of your business like financials, firm size, and client base. Your firm's leader is accountable for which goals you set, the subject, not necessarily the number. The number is part of planning. You should start your planning session with a set of proposed goals from your leader. Again, subjects, not numbers, allowing flexibility to introduce new ideas. Ideally, your biggest goals are performance measures that you continue to use again and again as your practice grows, like revenue, client number. You reset those goals as you achieve them. Next slide. Strategic goal setting is an acquired skill, so don't worry. If this is your first time engaging in structured planning, start simply. Less truly is more when setting the overarching goals for your firm. For example, you could set a few long-term goals and mirror incremental gains as the same number of shorter-term goals. Here you see 5 and 1 year goals that show that. Or you could set a few long-term goals with several contributing shorter-term sub-goals. Incremental goals allow you to chip away at big long-term goals over time and help to ensure success. Sub-goals allow for flexibility to test how smaller goals contribute to the larger achievements. Keep in mind that as your suite of strategic goals expands and increases in complexity, it can obscure the most important things and become an unruly administrative burden. So less is more, a few really important goals. Set your goals or set goals that you intend to achieve before a dependent planning cycle. So for instance, 1 year goals should be measured before you host the strategic planning session that will kick off the following year's efforts. Try to get that in a week, 2 weeks before your next cycle. Determine goal timelines that feel right for your firm and for your experience with strategic planning. You will get better at this with practice. Take a quick peek at the example 5-year mirrored and incremental 1-year goals on this slide. We're referring to them throughout the presentation. They'll be the example that I go back to, specifically the mirrored incremental goals of expanding the practice to new states. Next slide. Goals aren't simply wish lists. They are achievable, right fit outcomes for your practice. To set goals well, you need to pull together data about your own business as well as external factors that could impact your success. This information must be collected in advance of your planning sessions and presented to your attendees and contributors as you collectively set goals for the upcoming cycle. If you're new to formal planning, it will take some time to set up data collection, tracking, and analysis. That's okay. Just bring as much information as possible to your session, and over time, your data incorporation will become more sophisticated. If there's a goal that you want to reach, but for which you don't have current information, like market share, go ahead and set a tentative percentage and commit to developing the supporting data collection and analysis before your next planning cycle. You want to have a hard number next time. Next slide. High performance isn't the only reason to set stretch goals. Challenges provide fulfilling work and opportunities for innovation. Meeting a goal easily or early can shift focus away from successful efforts that need to be maintained. So set ambitious goals, but do so wisely, balancing them with a healthy awareness of the risks involved in the pursuit of them and of the impact of not reaching them. Consistently missed set goals kill morale, even when achieving amazing outcomes. Only a small percentage of your goals, like 20%, should be difficult stretches, and there should be a firm-wide understanding that you've set ambitious goals. While every employee of your business contributes to your goals, leadership should be accountable for them. Specifically, the leader most closely associated with the activities that impact the success of a goal is the individual accountable for that goal. And there should be only one person accountable for the success of any goal. Next slide. We have now passed the baton. Oh, sorry, skipped a little bit. The more granular we get with planning, the more popular branded frameworks for planning diverge in their recommendations. So you may be using one, you may have used a few, you may be looking into some. They're all going to split here, and they're going to call things different things and recommend different ways of going about planning this part. So keeping with today's theme of broad applicability, we're discussing flexible action plans. If you have questions about how to incorporate action planning best practices into specific approaches, please bring them up during our Q&A time at the end of this presentation. Here we go. We've now passed the baton from the strategic side of planning to the tactical side. Once we've set goals, we have to decide what actions we'll take to reach them. Most planning frameworks use proprietary, catchy names and metaphors for what boils down to project work. Projects are relatively short-term, defined efforts that have a specified outcome and should impact set key business metrics. While project definitions should contain hard numbers, we have to allow for a bit of variance to also adopt initiatives that have more to do with preparation and testing and may not have those numbers. At Get Stuffed Up, we use a project naming convention that allows for this flexibility. Bear with me. It is action to impact the main KPI or measurable by the goal from current to anticipated, no later than timeline. Just bear with me. This is not exactly an a la carte menu, but we're able to flex it into what way seems best for each of our projects. So based on the example expansion goals from a couple of slides ago, the quarterly projects for expanding into new states in 1 year, one state could be: first, establish a business entity in Montana no later than March 15th, 2025. Then, onboard 2 attorneys who have passed the bar in Montana no later than June 1, 2025. Then, Develop and implement a Montana-based marketing plan no later than September 15th, 2025. And finally, bring on 10 Montana-based clients to expand the practice footprint into one new state from 4 states to 5 states no later than December 15th, 2025. I only put the first and last one there on the slide. While the goals feel a little odd cluttered in the names of the first 3 projects, so I left it out of that first one, the goal is implied there. We could include it if we prefer. When projects don't explicitly list the goals that they're designed to impact, our record keeping must clearly link those projects to the goals. And the goal should be the known guiding element throughout the life of the project. Next slide. Some of the data that we bring into strategic planning should be actual financial performance, past performance, and upcoming budget. If you do not have a separate budget setting mechanism in place, you can add it at the beginning of the annual calendar or fiscal year strategic planning sessions. Work closely with your finance leaders. You should set budget, working closely with your finance leaders, you should set budgets for each project that include known and anticipated expenses, as well as a little bit of padding for unexpected needs. Another project budgeting element for which you need to plan is the time and headspace of your contributors. As with goal setting, project planning is in many ways a less is more and more venture. Focusing intently on a few projects that will move the needle does a lot more good for your business than doling out a bunch of less impactful, distracting work. Ensure that there is sufficient backup in place so that key contributors to the projects can devote time to your project work without negatively impacting your normal operations. Another push for a less is more mindset is that it's very difficult to analyze contributing factors if too many operational shifts are happening at the same time. You may succeed in reaching a goal, but it may not be because of the reason you thought, and that can set you off on a wrong track the next cycle. If we've set goals well, identifying outcomes that will move the business from its current state to an elevated future state, the steps that we take to reach these goals should require effort and change. If one of the obvious ways to impact a set goal is by continuing business as usual, we should make note of this, but not establish an administratively burdensome project for it. It is just your normal operating procedures. Continuing with our state expansion example, maintaining operations in our 4 current states does not represent a change, and so it's not an ideal candidate for a devoted project. The care that we give to implementing and managing true changes is no less important than the projects that we identify to meet our goals. As we identify projects, it's critical to create firm-wide awareness and to provide regular progress updates as we execute. In our example, each state expansion project would be announced at the beginning of the project work. In our case, the beginning of each quarter. Associated behavioral and procedural changes should be announced as early as possible, and we should offer training on new processes as needed. For instance, state expansion requires keeping up with new billing procedures and policies, and we should provide awareness, resources, and training to the finance personnel as soon as possible so that they can incorporate those. Project completion is another important time to create firm-wide awareness. The tenets of project scoping and planning are fairly universal. If you'd like to know how Get Staffed Up's project management office supports our planning and execution, please reach out to me after today's webinar. As with the other strategic planning elements, projects require single accountability in order to be most effective. Identify a single best suited owner for each planned project. This owner is accountable for the project's completion and for creating necessary awareness. Next slide. This segment is more of an asterisk than an insight. Incompletion of a project does not necessarily equal failure. In our example, if establishing a business entity in Montana proves to be vastly more expensive than we anticipated, and and to require shifting the firm's budget in ways that could put other critical aspects at risk, it may be wise to abandon the planned project. If during your project research you discover that it is much easier and cheaper to establish a business entity in, say, South Dakota, you can pivot to a new location and follow a similar, albeit shortened, path to achieve the one state expansion goal in the originally allotted timeframe for that goal. This being said, our best learning comes from seeing a project through. Stopping short can impact morale and the trust of your employees and clients. So shift project scope and change project focus only when absolutely necessary. Next slide. Throughout the strategic cycle, it's important to plan your planning sessions to create awareness, set expectations, and provide intuitive resources. Determine the roles that need to be filled, the people who need to be part of the discussions, and the elements that you want to include during the planning sessions. Next slide. This is big. During the intro, I mentioned that I'd facilitated and led strategic planning. These are two very distinct roles, and to host effective planning, you need both. The planning leader should be the strategic head of your firm, accountable for the vision of the business. The leader should set the list of proposed goal items in advance of the planning session. During the session, the leader directs discussions and acts as a deciding voice when those discussions have been exhausted without consensus. As planning sessions conclude, the leader is responsible for garnering the trust and buy-in of contributors, and then for championing strategic planning decisions as they are presented firm-wide. A common pitfall of strategic planning is the tendency of leaders to disrupt the flow of the sessions. While this is very tempting when things aren't heading the way that we anticipated or desired, or when we feel like we're missing something that's important, it's one of the most damaging things that we can do to our strategic efforts. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, please take this. Craft an agenda, stick to the agenda, empower your facilitator to keep the session on track, and collect post-session feedback to fine-tune the next cycle's session rather than disrupting the current one. The facilitator is absolutely critical to hosting strategic planning that sets you up for success. Designate a facilitator who is highly organized, assertive, and who deeply understands your vision. The facilitator collects information and distributes resources throughout the strategic planning cycle. During the planning session, the facilitator records decisions and keeps time. I do not mean that they simply take minutes. I mean that they actively keep the session on agenda, even reining in the leader when necessary. A small investment in meeting and project management training for the facilitator goes a long way toward developing facilitation that ensures successful planning. Next slide. The attendees and contributors for your strategic planning sessions should be the existing leaders of each facet of your practice. A very important part of strategic planning is elevating the voices of people throughout your firm. You can do this in a number of different ways, including surveys, focus groups, probing questions during performance management conversations, and/or evergreen suggestion boxes, either physical or virtual. Your leadership is responsible for bringing this collected feedback from throughout the firm into your strategic planning along with their own ideas. Ideally, your leadership team is already comprised of a mix of risk-aware and venture-seeking individuals. Successful strategic planning requires this mix. Encourage your attendees to lean into their individuals' perspectives and to speak up when they perceive opportunities and risks. Next slide. An agenda is non-negotiable for strategic planning. Build an agenda that suits your firm, your attendees, the time you have, and your approach to planning. In general, the more objective information you can review in advance of bringing individual ideas to the table, so at the beginning of your session, the better you'll be at avoiding top of mind or pet issue bias that can keep you mired in the moment instead of focused on the future. Bring in all of the previously gathered data for review, and then pull it back in as it applies to specific goal and project proposals when you get to those discussions. What I've labeled as opportunities goes by many names. You may be used to SWOT terminology. At Get Staffed Up, we call this what's working and what's not working. Present these opportunity ideas from each attendee's perspective and from your firm-wide feedback gathering effort before you embark on goal setting, as these ideas may have an impact on the final goal items and values. Budgeting is also necessary, but it can be done independently from strategic planning, as long as to the extent that it can inform what goals you pursue that have a price tag. Team building and org structure review are common strategic planning elements that aren't strictly necessary, but do bring a lot of value. Team building doesn't have to be a cheesy activity. It can be anything that helps your leadership team learn more about one another and fosters a sense of collective effort. Next slide. There are somewhat peripheral considerations that can determine the effectiveness of strategic planning in a big way. In a nutshell, they are dedication to focus and commitment to communication. Next slide. There are a handful of things that we can do to focus, ensuring a productive and engaging strategic planning session. And it's very important to create a space that allows your leadership team to remain undistracted throughout strategic planning. For in-person sessions, it's helpful to book a conference space in a location other than your office to ensure that you're not interrupted. In virtual environments, ask each attendee to disable alerts and to resist the temptation to check ordinary communications. Set out of office notifications that clearly identify a point of contact and the date and time that you'll return to the office. Establish a very limited number of individuals who have the authority to interrupt your planning sessions in case of emergency. Next, stick to the agenda. Even if you notice low-hanging fruit for improvement, your planning will be more effective for this discipline. You'll learn more about the act of planning, and you'll develop feedback and iterative skills among your leadership team. Next, avoid top-of-mind bias. You need to set this expectation among attendees in advance of your planning session. Most acute issues are best addressed through normal operations. Strategic planning is your opportunity to step out of the daily grind and into an elevated vision. It's easy to spend an entire day discussing possible solutions for a single issue. Do not waste your time in this strategic moment defining solutions. Through project planning, you're defining the means by which you find solutions and the individuals who will be engaged in that effort. A single webinar does not provide nearly enough space to get into the details of project scoping, management, and execution. If you have questions about how our project management office supports these efforts, please reach out to me after the webinar. Next slide. Communication and adoption are what brings the whole strategic planning cycle together. Effective strategic planning requires a high level of trust in your employees at every level of the business. You must be willing to share with your leader attendees as much as possible about the health of your business, including trickier topics like finances, buyout opportunities, and timelines. Planning decisions should be communicated to your entire firm, along with awareness of who is accountable for each element. Remember that when more than one person is accountable, no one's accountable. Establish a single accountable person for each item and charge them with regular progress updates. At each step of planning, execution, completion, and change adoption, there are audiences that need to know what's going on and how to modify their engagement to meet the new normal. These audiences may expand beyond the employees of your firm to your clients and even your community. Next slide. While we've barely even scratched the surface of strategic planning today, we have identified the most important elements for setting up a new planning effort or enhancing an existing one. Strategic planning is usually the best the best available data to set goals and planned efforts that will help you get from where you are now to where you want to be. Remember to plan the plan, stick to the plan, and learn from the act of planning. I'd be delighted to follow up with anyone who would like a deeper dive into specific components. Later this week, as a thank you for your interest, we're sending out a planning resource packet, including the steps to take before your planning session, a sample agenda, a sample decisions record, guidance for crafting mission, vision, and values, and some helpful planning resource links. So without further ado, we'll step into Q&A. Please use that function in Zoom and we'll answer any questions that you've got.
Thank you, Sue. That was amazing. But as you said, just a surface of everything that planning has to do, right? So we're going to start with a question that we're going to answer live. The question reads, what are the best tools or software for tracking progress on strategic initiatives in a law firm setting?
Thank you. I actually looked into this. I have done planning for the Department of Law, and I've done planning here at Get Staffed Up that serves lawyers. I think after looking through it, I think the general planning frameworks that are out there are much better than anything law firm specific. These are things that just guide goals, guide planning, and guide projects, and they don't have to be specifically tailored to law firms. We will send out some resource links. I'm very hesitant to endorse a specific planning framework, but we'll send out a few that you can explore on your own, and you can decide what's best for your firm or for your practice right now or in the future.
Thank you, Sue. And the second question we have, by the way, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. If you miss a goal, should you adjust the next goals accordingly or leave them as originally planned, and why?
That is a great question. You should leave them as originally planned. By and large. So if you have a 10-year goal and then supporting 5-year goals and then a 1-year goal and even quarterly goals, you leave those long-term goals in place because they're going to motivate you to get back on track. And you need to have a record of success and failure. And success and failure, like I said earlier, it's not necessarily good and bad. You may have failed for a very positive reason. So keep those goals in place, mark whether you hit it or didn't, and then evaluate why that was a hit or a miss and what to do next time, whether that was positive or negative.
Awesome. Thank you. We just got another question. Are there any AI tools that prove useful for planning?
The future here, yes. I haven't dabbled into any AI planning tools, but you can use the normal AI tools that you have available to help you craft goals and plug them into your planning sessions. So I would say use what you're familiar with in terms of pulling data together and having sort of predictive goals. That's a way you can use AI. And also in terms of looping in sort of ideas from outside. So you can log into Copilot and just say, what should be the goals for my firm? And you'll probably get some good ideas that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you to the audience. Do you have any more questions before we conclude? As Sue mentioned, we're gonna send you, as a thank you for your interest, a resource later in the week to help you with your planning. And as Sue said, you need to make a plan for the plan. So don't forget that. That's very important. Let's see if we get any more questions. In the meantime, Sue, you mentioned the facilitator. Is there any position that you think is best suited to be a facilitator, or just as long as you identify any of your team members with the traits that you mentioned, it's okay, or what would you suggest?
That's a great question. Traits are very important. That's what you want. You want someone organized and assertive, and someone who understands your vision. But It can be anyone. If you've got a good executive assistant working directly under your leader, they're going to work really well in the room together. That's a great one. I facilitate in our strategic sessions because our C-suite is fairly large, and I'm able to do that. So someone associated with internal operations or processes who really understands kind of like the value of mechanisms and the value of process, that's going to be your best facilitator. But they have to be very assertive, and they've got to understand your vision.
Okay, that's very interesting. And we just got another question. Thank you.
Mhm.
Why is transparency necessary? Can that put you at risk?
Yeah, yes, it can put you at risk, and so your messaging is very important. But if you've got people in that space making decisions, so if you've got someone in your strategic planning session making a decision about what you're going to do in 5 years, you've decided to put them in that place of trust, and they cannot possibly help you, and they probably will harm you if they don't know that you're looking at a buyout in 4 years. So the degree to which you're transparent and the sensitive information with which you are transparent, that's up to you, but be as transparent as you possibly can for anyone who's contributing to your strategic ideas. Otherwise they're going to push you kind of away from where you want to go. Your big decisions, your sensitive decisions, they are strategic, they are strategy.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And how many people would you say is enough for a strategic planning session? Because if it's a small law firm, would you recommend to include everyone or just a certain level of employees? Or if it's a big firm, what would you say? Okay, I would recommend not having more than 10 people in the room, or what would you suggest?
It really varies on the size of the firm, how long you've been in business, how many times you've done strategic planning, and what you plan. What are those proposed goals that you have in place as you're heading in? The leader will know that. Um, I will say 10 to 15 is probably the max that I'm comfortable with. Otherwise, you've just got too many cooks in the kitchen and it takes a very, very long time to get through a discussion. That's a lot of people. So that's for a very large firm. When I was at the Colorado Department of Law, we had hundreds of lawyers working for us, and we had about 15 people in the room. Here it gets stuffed up. We've got 150-ish folks, and we usually have about 8 or 9 people in the room. So just kind of right size for your firm. You know the people who will be in those discussions, you know how wordy they are, how engaged they are, and then also keep in mind those sensitive things that you're going to need to share to get to strategic outcomes, and share with the people that you do trust.
Okay, thank you so much. So I believe we haven't received any other questions, but it was an honor to have you as our guest today. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone that attended. We greatly appreciate it. You can email Sue if you have any other questions or if you want to deep dive in your planning sessions. And again, we will send you later this week the recording of this webinar, the resource, and the presentation. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.